Before we begin, don't forget to pray for our brothers. The hardship is still ongoing. We ask God to relieve them. Peace be upon you. In 1845 AD, an expedition consisting of 2 ships set out on a journey to the frozen Canadian archipelago, aiming to find a passage that would be a shortcut connecting the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean via the Canadian Arctic. However, shortly after the start of the journey, 5 members of the crew fell ill, forcing the expedition to leave them on an island in Greenland. The expedition then continued with 129 people. 129 people, no one would see them again. For more than a century, no one knew the fate of the ships. But in recent decades, we began to learn what happened, and what happened to them was more terrifying than anyone could imagine. Welcome, and let me tell you today about the Lost Franklin expedition. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive notifications of the new story every week. And I want you to get the video to 200,000 likes before the next episode. Your enthusiasm with me. With the beginning of the 19th century and the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the door to exploration opened wide, especially with the emergence of steam engines. For the first time in human history, the world map was nearing completion. By 1845, explorers had covered almost every corner of the Earth. Except for a small part that had not yet been discovered, a coastal strip about 1,600 kilometers long in the Canadian Arctic, a place where many explorers sacrificed their lives to discover the Northwest Passage. But this discovery would not come easily and would be the graveyard for a large number of British sailors. During this period, England and other major powers were trying to expand their influence in every part of the world, and this expansion was, of course, by sea. But they always faced the problem that the Americas were a natural sea barrier. Since the Panama Canal did not yet exist, this meant that ships had to take the long route around South America and then return to the Pacific Ocean or go from the other side of the world. In both cases, the route was very long. So if a shortcut was found, the journey from England to China would be much shorter, which meant more trade and much higher profits. This made the discovery of a shortcut a very important goal for the Royal Navy. Therefore, in the early 19th century, the Navy launched a large number of expeditions in an attempt to map this route, but none of them reached what they were looking for. In the mid-19th century, the Royal Navy decided to make a final attempt, an expedition heading west towards Lancaster Sound and then south for about 1,670 kilometers, a very difficult journey. But whoever succeeded in it would gain fame and glory. But who would get this honor? The Navy was unable to make a decision. Sir John Barrow, a senior official in the Navy and in charge of preparing the expedition, was 82 years old and wanted to end his career with a great achievement like this. But who could lead an expedition of this difficulty? The first person he thought of was the famous polar explorer Sir William Edward Parry. Captain Parry was born in Wales in 1790 AD and held the record in 1827 for the farthest point reached by an explorer in the north. Throughout his service in the Navy, he led 4 different expeditions to the Arctic, but when Sir Barrow offered him to lead the expedition, he refused, saying that he was tired of the Arctic. The second choice in Sir Barrow's mind was Sir James Clark Ross. Captain Ross was born in 1800 AD and was also a polar explorer like Captain Parry. Throughout his 50 years of service in the Royal Navy, he led 6 expeditions to the Arctic and 1 to the Antarctic. But when Sir Barrow offered him to lead the expedition, he also refused, saying that he had just gotten married and promised his wife that he would not go on any more dangerous expeditions to the Arctic. The third choice was a young commander named James Fitzjames. As a quick side note, while James was in Singapore, he met George Barrow, the son of Sir Barrow the Elder. It is not exactly known what happened there, but what happened was that James paid people money to cover up something George did, something that, if known, would upset his father, Sir Barrow. Therefore, Sir Barrow returned the favor and helped him get promoted quickly to prestigious positions in the Navy, to the point where he reached the rank of ship captain at the age of 29. Despite the clear favoritism from Sir Barrow towards James, the Navy refused to let him be the leader of the expedition, arguing that he did not have enough experience. The next choice was Captain Francis Crozier. Crozier was born into a humble family in Ireland in 1796 and was a close friend of Captain Ross. Captain Crozier, like those before him, was an Arctic explorer. Throughout his 38 years of service in the Navy, he led 6 expeditions to the Arctic and Antarctic. Crozier was very suitable to lead this expedition, but there was one obstacle that made the Navy reject the choice. Crozier was Irish and came from a humble family, not from the aristocracy, and the British did not want the man who would map the last point on the world map and open the most important sea passage and gain this honor to be Irish. Therefore, they decided to make him the second in command. But who would be the leader? The fifth choice was Sir John Franklin. Captain Franklin was 59 years old at the time and had been serving in the Navy for 45 years. He was born in 1786 into a wealthy family and was the only one of his siblings who joined the Navy, and he was promoted in rank year after year, participating in many battles, most notably the French Revolutionary War and the Napoleonic Wars. Most of those who died of hunger, and those who survived lived because they ate the leather of their shoes. Therefore, Franklin became known as the man who ate his shoes. However, despite this, Franklin was known among his men as a religious and kind man who cared about them. This expedition was a golden opportunity for Franklin to correct the mistakes of the past, and based on this, he accepted the offer. The search for a leader for the expedition ended, and the Royal Navy finally settled on Sir John Franklin as the leader of the expedition, and Francis Crozier would be the second in command, and he would lead HMS Terror. Finally, James Fitzjames would be the third in command, and he would lead HMS Erebus. The ships chosen for the expedition were the best ships for the mission. The main ship, HMS Erebus, was a warship of the Hecla class, specially modified for Arctic expeditions. It was built in 1826, 32 meters long and 9 meters wide, and its crew consisted of 67 sailors. The second ship, HMS Terror, was a bit older, built in 1813 as a warship of the Vesuvius class, and its size and armament were very similar to the ship Erebus. These two ships were chosen specifically because warships are equipped to launch heavy mortar shells, and therefore their hull is reinforced more strongly than ordinary ships. This allows them to withstand sailing in the ice of the Arctic better. In addition, the ships were equipped with the latest technology available at the time. They were the first ships in the entire Royal Navy to operate with steam engines. They were equipped with a steam engine with a power of 25 horsepower, which could propel the ship at a speed of 4 knots or 8 kilometers per hour. In addition, the copper propellers connected to the engine were designed to be detachable and retractable inside the ship's hull, so that they could protect the propeller from the ice if necessary. As for the steam pipes that were connected to the engine, they were distributed throughout the ship to be used at the same time as a central heating system. These engines needed about a ton of fresh water per hour, and based on this, we needed another piece of equipment to be present on the ship, which is seawater desalination equipment, to provide fresh water for the steam engine and to provide fresh water for the ship's crew to drink as much as they wanted. As for the ship's hull itself, it was reinforced with iron plates installed on the front and in the middle, and the thickness of the ship's hull itself was doubled. You could say that the ships were like a space shuttle for that era. They had the latest and best technology available at the time. On May 19, 1845, the expedition set out on its long journey, carrying 134 people with them, with supplies sufficient for all members of the expedition for 3 full years. 2 tons of tobacco, 7,500 liters of alcoholic beverages, and a library with 1,200 books. The most important thing that modern technology provided for them was canned food. 16,000 cans of preserved food. For the first time, all the food that the sailors would have with them would be canned, and these supplies would be enough for 3 full years. The expedition moved from London north to Scotland and then crossed the Atlantic Ocean to the Whaling Islands on the west coast of Greenland. But before the expedition reached Greenland, 5 members of the crew fell ill. They were sick and could not continue the journey. Based on this, they were discharged. These 5 were the ones who actually escaped. In the few days they spent on the island, the crew members wrote their last letters to their families in England. In general, the entire crew was excited. They were about to begin the most important journey they had ever made in their lives, a journey that would make their names in history. And to be fair, it did immortalize their names in history, but not for the reason they thought. On July 12, 1845, the expedition set out with 129 people on board. 2 weeks later, a group of whalers saw them in Baffin Bay, which was the last time anyone saw the ships or the men on them. Sailing in the Arctic is slower than anywhere else in the world. Even in the summer, the canals and waterways are full of ice, and the ships need to keep pushing blocks of ice out of their way as they move. This must happen very slowly. If the ship moves quickly while doing this, it is very easy for these blocks to break the front of the ship and sink the entire ship. Due to this slowness, the expedition in the first year covered only about 800 kilometers. They went around Cornwallis Island, but they did not find the passage in that place. In the end, they returned to Beechy Island with the beginning of winter, which is about 350 kilometers from Baffin Bay, the point where they started in the first place. However, they considered the first year a good achievement. We now knew that the area above did not have any passages. Since the winter in the Arctic freezes all the seawater, they took shelter in a small bay between Beechy Island and Devon Island. When the water froze, the ship's crew lowered the sails and covered the entire ship from above with a cloth cover and surrounded the sides of the ship with snow to insulate it. In this way, they were able to create a slightly warmer atmosphere to spend the winter in until the summer came and the snow melted and they could continue their journey. Morale was very high during this winter. They had made good progress before the water froze, and they had plenty of food and drink with them and were not worried about anything. In the first winter, from 1845 to 1846, 3 members of the crew died and were buried on Beechy Island. Their bodies were found in the 1980s and were amazingly preserved for more than a century due to the ice. When the bodies were examined, it became clear that the cause of death was tuberculosis. But this is not the only reason. There is another important reason that we will know about shortly. The 5 men who got sick and were left behind, remember them? It turned out that they were also infected with tuberculosis. This means that tuberculosis was already widespread among the members of the expedition from the beginning. Tuberculosis at this stage was a deadly disease because the vaccines that are currently used had not yet been discovered. With the melting of the ice in the spring, the ships were freed from the ice, and the expedition began to continue its journey south towards the island that was known at the time as King William Land. It was an area of land on the edge of the discovered areas at the time, and they did not know at the time that it was an island. When they reached the crossroads at the William Strait, Franklin had 2 choices: to head south, hoping that it was actually an island and that there would be a place from below to pass through, or to head west, hoping that they could cross the strait before winter. Because Franklin did not want to risk going down to the south and finding the road closed, forcing them to go back north and then start their journey to the west, he decided to head west directly. This was the biggest mistake he made. The area they entered west of King William Island was the most dangerous water in the entire region, an area of water where several channels flow into at the same time, and the ice accumulates in it in huge quantities. Before they could correct their course and get out of this mess, they got stuck due to the large amount of ice, and the ships froze near the west coast of King William Island. There, they would spend the second winter from 1846 to 1847, and what they did not know was that this winter would be the beginning of the real hardship. From their bad luck, the winter of 1846 and the years that followed were among the coldest years that the Arctic had ever seen. The shock was that the ice around King William Island did not melt in the summer. At this time, in January 1847, Lady Franklin, Sir Franklin's wife, began to worry greatly. The expedition was expected to last 1 year, and we had already been 2 full years. So she went to the Navy and began to demand that they launch a search and rescue mission to look for the expedition. But the Navy thought that there was no problem. It was normal for an expedition whose expected duration was 1 year to last 2 years. The proof is that the expedition was actually equipped with supplies for 3 years. But Lady Franklin was not convinced by this and launched a wide media campaign, using all her acquaintances to put pressure on the Navy. Although the Navy did not know at the time, the expedition actually needed rescue. The second reason that we said we would talk about shortly is the food. The canned food that they had with them on the journey was not packed well. The company that was responsible for the packing had signed a contract to pack 16,000 cans in just 7 weeks. And the technology at the time did not allow for this. In addition, they won the tender because they offered a low price for the cans, and they were able to offer this price because the cans were of poor quality. The lead solder that was used to seal the cans leaked into the food and contaminated all the food with lead. In addition, some of the cans were not cooked well. Although the crew did not know at this stage, the food had caused food poisoning for many members of the crew. The bad luck did not stop there. The pipes used in the water desalination system were also lined with lead. When this lead was exposed to seawater, it began to corrode and deposit in the water that they were drinking. What made matters worse was that sailors for centuries had been using lemon juice bottles to fight scurvy, which was a very common disease among sailors due to a lack of vitamin C, because they lived at sea for months and sometimes years away from fruits and vegetables. But this time, because of the technology that ruined them, they did not take lemon juice bottles with them as usual. They took canned vegetables and fruits with them and said that they would not need lemon juice. With the poor packing, the vegetables and fruits lost their effectiveness over time. The sailors may not have felt this in the first year or even the second year, but we had already entered the 3rd year. On May 28, 1847, the expedition sent a team with sleds to the shore of King William Island. There they left 2 messages in piles of stones so that people who came after them would find the messages. The messages were simple and direct. They wrote their route up to that point, the location of the ships, that Captain Franklin was still the leader, and that everything was fine. But after these messages, nothing would be fine. It is clear that they thought that the snow would melt and they would begin to complete their journey. But in 1847 and 1848, the snow did not melt in June, July, or even August, and the ships remained trapped throughout this period. In this long winter that never ends, the ship Terror began to sink into the snow heavily, and most of its crew moved to the ship Erebus, with the rest of their colleagues to keep each other warm and conserve the food that was left with them. As for the ship Terror, they began to use it as a refrigerator for the extra equipment they had with them and for the bodies that began to increase day after day. On June 11, 1847, Captain John Franklin finally died. In the winter of 1847 to 1848, the Navy began to move. The media campaign had been running for a year, accusing the Navy of inaction, and therefore they had to do something. At the beginning of 1848, the search and rescue mission set out and entered the area from both sides, from the Atlantic Ocean and from the Pacific Ocean. James Ross, one of the candidates who refused to lead the expedition because he was still a newlywed, went out on this search mission in an attempt to save his close friend, Francis Crozier. On April 22, 1848, after being trapped in their place for 18 full months and unable to move, Captain Crozier, who took over the leadership after the death of Captain Franklin, decided to abandon the ships and try his luck on land instead of staying on the ship and dying one after another. 105 members of the crew put small boats on sleds and put all their needs on them and began their journey south on King William Island. The plan was to reach the Back River, 240 kilometers away. When they reached there, they would get on the boats they had with them and go to the nearest trading post. On April 25th, they reached the stone piles, where they had left the messages and amended the messages as follows. They wrote in it, "The ship Terror and the ship Erebus were abandoned on April 22nd, 30 miles northwest of this point, after being besieged by the ice since September 12, 1846, And until now, the crew consists of 105 people under the command of Captain Crozier, and the total deaths so far are Captain Franklin, 9 officers, and 15 individuals. Signed James Fitzjames, captain of the Erebus. The land journey began, and the men began to pull sleds weighing more than 3 tons, sometimes on ice and sometimes on rocks in freezing temperatures. The situation was as bad as it could be. All the men were suffering from general weakness due to malnutrition and lead poisoning, and many of them were slowly dying from scurvy. Throughout the journey that they had planned, every now and then, someone would die. At first, when someone died, they would put him on the boat that was on the sleds, but this increased the burden on the rest. Imagine people with food poisoning, lid poisoning, and scurvy, in addition to those who were infected with tuberculosis. They were forced to walk 240 kilometers in the freezing cold, and not only that, they were required to pull boats weighing more than 3 tons. Do not tell me to leave them. They could not give them up because they would need them if they succeeded in reaching the river. One after another, the men decided that whoever got tired and could not continue would be left in a tent with some food and a desperate promise that they would one day return to him. In addition, small groups separated from the large group. We do not know if they separated intentionally, or if the large group abandoned them, or if they got lost from each other due to the icy weather. What we know is that more than 20 bodies were found along the coast of King William Island, and bodies were found in more than 12 different places. In 1850, a group of Inuit, who are the Eskimo people, found an abandoned ship, which was later confirmed to be either Erebus or Terror. When they entered it, they found a group of dead people in their beds. This news made the researchers believe that a group of those who separated returned to the ship again and decided to die in it, which was better for them than dying in the middle of the ice. When the Inuit, who are the Eskimo people, were asked about the expedition, they gave very disturbing testimonies. They said that they saw a group of men eating human flesh. They were eating those who died from their colleagues. They said that they found a mass grave with more than 30 bodies, all of which had signs of cutting, indicating that their colleagues ate them after they died. Of course, when the British Navy heard about this, they completely rejected the idea and said that the Inuit people were liars and savages, and that civilized British people would never do this. In August 1850, the search team found the graves of the 3 who were buried on Beechey Island at the beginning of the journey. At that time, they confirmed that something had actually happened to the sailors. After this discovery, the search and rescue mission became more important than discovering the passage itself, and more than 10 ships went out on a search and rescue operation for the lost Franklin expedition. Several of the rescue ships would encounter similar accidents over the years. Amazingly, one of these ships, the HMS Investigator, under the command of Captain Robert McClure, would find the Northwest Passage by chance while they were looking for the expedition, but it would also get trapped in the ice, and its crew would abandon it after 2 years. In 1853, its crew would meet with the crew of another ship that was also trapped in the ice, and together they would reach safety over the course of a year. On March 31, 1854, the British Navy announced that all members of the expedition had died while on duty. In 1993, 145 years after the start of the search, the biggest shock occurred. The last camp that the expedition's men had made on the island was found. When the researchers examined it, the issue of cannibalism that the Inuit had said was confirmed. They found the remains of human bones with cut marks showing that someone had tried to extract the marrow from inside them. Finally, in 2014, the wreckage of the ship HMS Erebus was discovered, but the condition of the ship was completely deteriorated. But 2 years later, the ship HMS Terror was also found. The strange coincidence was that it was found in Terror Bay, the bay that was named in its honor without anyone knowing that it was sunk in it. But what was amazing was that this ship was in excellent condition, and the initial dives brought up a huge collection of artifacts. But in 2020, the whole thing was disrupted due to Corona. In May 2022, the research team returned to continue their work, and perhaps in the coming years, new details about what happened to the ill-fated Franklin expedition will be revealed to us. And with that, we have reached the end of the story. I am waiting for your opinion. If you have a story that you want me to tell you, write it in the comments. And the idea that I find a lot of interaction with, I will put it in the weekly vote, and do it if you choose it. Show me your enthusiasm with a subscription, like, comment, and all this beautiful work, and share the video with anyone you think will like it. I will see you next time with a story that is more exciting than the one before. Peace.